And it's now the time for our interview. Today we are interviewing Rod Bailey. He is our agricultural expert here, and he's building up the most comprehensive guide to moving to the country you will ever hear on radio. Rod, good morning to you. It's great to have you here with us again, my friend.
Good morning, team.
Good morning.
Rod, before we start, we are going to be talking about property access and soil and, what to do with that. But before we get into that, a lot of people are very curious about how are farmers coping with the increase of prices of petrol, of gas, of diesel, and in particular, and also not only the increasing in prices, but word is that there's even shortages happening. Can you tell us a little bit from your perspective what's going on in that world?
Yeah, this is a huge concern for farmers, Scaffy. I'll start off by saying not all of us are affected in the same way or to the same extent. For example, compared to most farmers, the fuel usage on our farm is pretty small. We're largely a people-powered farm, not a machinery-powered farm. But even on our small farm, a small increase in fuel costs or any costs makes a large difference to our bottom line because farming profit margins are so small.
Yeah.
But for those large-scale farmers that Australia relies on for food or fibre, the dramatic rise in fuel costs in the last week and even fuel availability, as you say, are a huge problem. I'm hearing that some Australian fuel wholesalers are rationing fuel. In both New South Wales and Western Australia, these wholesalers are only delivering 10 to 50% of their country orders. It seems they're prioritising the more lucrative retail market, and in some places they've even stopped supplying country fuel distributors completely.
So, because in these farms, what happens? So they usually there's a big big tanker truck that goes to their property and delivers the fuel on site. That normally, because surely you would not be driving your tractors everywhere, because that would be a massive waste of
That's right,
of fuel.
The farmers can't just drive their tractors and trucks down to the local survey to fuel up. So farmers rely on bulk fuel deliveries onto their farms to run their large machinery. And, so that's a real problem. Getting fuel deliveries onto farms is proving really difficult. Many farmers are only getting a quarter or less of what they're actually ordered, or they're not getting it at all. One large cropper, in the middle of seeding winter grain crops, ordered 20,000 litres. I think it was early last week or late the week before. He only received 2,000 litres.
Oh, wow.
And he's not sure when the next delivery might arrive. And these guys, in broadacre cropping, as I say, they're in the middle of winter seeding at the moment. They use tens of thousands of litres a week. And they're getting 2,000 litres, delivered to their farms.
So that's enough for just a couple of days of operation, and that's it.
Well, some not even that. They might have 5 or 6 tractors going, seeders going at once. These guys run 24 hours when the soil conditions are right. And so, where farmers can get it, some are stockpiling fuel because they're uncertain whether they'll be able to get it in the next week or two. And so, it's a huge problem, but it goes beyond fuel. You can imagine the stress of these large-scale croppers. If their soil conditions are right, they need to get the seed in now. But at the same time, they're struggling with raising fertiliser prices, because especially urea, which is the main form of nitrogens that's used in cropping, it's critical for their winter cropping planning right now. And the fertiliser importers are reliant on supplies from the Middle East, where the urea is made from oil products. And so, not only are the fuel prices rising, the fertiliser prices are rising, but availability, the stress of not knowing what's going to happen next week is a real drama.
Wow. So that's the potential for some serious shortages in the food sector here from all of these shocks coming from all sides, pretty much.
It's very possible. And then, it goes further than that. Like, Australia's truckies are struggling to get enough fuel to transport goods into the regional areas. So whether it's the fertiliser going out to farms or whether it's spare parts or, whatever it is, all of it's severely disrupting farming activity. And, it really highlights that farmers carry the majority of the risk for our food production. Farmers aren't whingers. They do the best with what they've got. Sometimes they wish consumers of their food better understood the difficulties of their businesses. They're being squeezed from every side. Adverse weather events, that's the farmer's lot. At the moment, much of central and western Queensland is flooded. So all of those grain and cattle producers out there, their paddocks are flooded, their homesteads are flooded, they're not sure where their cattle are. We've got sharply rising costs. They're being squeezed by supermarkets. As I say, farmers carry nearly all of the risk involved in food production. And, it's so risky that insurance companies largely won't give them crop or income insurance. Statistical probabilities tell these insurance companies that if they insure farmers, they will lose their money. And all these things conspire. Many farmers at their end of their tether. To spare a thought and many a prayer, if you could, for these farmers that are really struggling to produce your food and fibre.
Absolutely. No, we're going to be praying for them because it looks like there's there's pressures from the other side. And look, you can argue which one is the most important industry in any country, but in whatever is the list that you come up with, farmers will always have to be there because without farmers, we just don't eat.
Yeah, God, the most important things in our life, when based on the metric of how long we can last without them, air's obviously first. Thankfully, we can only last 2 or 3 minutes without air, and praise God, he's got that sorted. Water, we can only last days without water. Thankfully at the moment we've got more water than we need in most parts of Australia. And thirdly is food. We can last a week or two without food. But we'll notice it if more and more farmers go belly up.
Absolutely.
The prices will increase, especially, our listeners in the city who struggle to grow their own food. We're at grave, at risk. No, what's the word? We're at the mercy of factors beyond our control. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people are looking to move to the country to be more in control, to be more independent of those food cycles. But,
exactly. And speaking of which, yes, what is our next step? Because I was going to say, sorry, you were going to say.
Before we go there, I just want to highlight something else. This is a really stressful time for farmers, but I want to mention that 2026 is being deemed the International Year of Farming Women. And I've got to say that ladies in the bush are the ones holding this nation's food production together.
Oh, really?
And they're bearing much or often most of the stress that's happening in farming businesses because, the blokes are out doing the thing, out in the paddock, in the fresh air and sunshine, growing the crops, dealing with real, tangible, physical things, finding solutions to problems. Really, farmers are the world's best problem solvers, not AI engineers or SpaceX engineers. Day after day, farmers are faced with unremitting challenges that need to be solved. But the guys are outside doing that. But the ladies are often the ones that manage the financial sides of things in farming businesses. They're trying to balance the books, which is often a difficult or impossible task. And they're doing this on top of all their home duties, raising the kids, which is a job in itself. In my wife's case, raising her primary interest these days is on our grandchildren, But like it or not, farming wives are spread too thin. They've never got enough time. They're trying to do the books, trying to pay the bills at night after the kids have gone to bed. There's never enough money in the bank. So they're facing the stress of juggling invoices from suppliers, paying the tax man, making sure there's enough money for the next mortgage repayment to go out. And after doing this at night after the kids have gone to sleep, they're trying to go to bed themselves and they can't switch off. And so they don't sleep well. Their cortisol levels are permanently elevated. It affects their physical health. Often they put on weight. You know, they struggle with mental health, spiritual health. You know, they get to the point where they feel they're not in control of their lives anymore. You know, this farming lifestyle, this farming business, because of all the pressures, has become more of a curse than it is a blessing. And so I'd really encourage you to spare a thought and many a prayer for these resilient men in the bush, producing our food and fibre, but especially the women. You know, all the time, but especially now when you hear about adverse weather events or supply chain interruptions or such as this war, you know, when all these things throw a spanner in the farming works, spare a thought and a prayer for these farming families that are doing it tough.
Absolutely, Rod. And look, we thank you for bringing that up, because oftentimes as you mentioned, farmers are not whingers. They're not whinging about it. They're never complaining about anything. We are the ones who are spoiled in living in the cities, and we only normally pay attention when something's wrong. This is kind of the one of the difficult things about being in the background. Is that people that are supporting and serving others from the background, they're often just noticed when things are not going well. When things are going well, nobody pays attention. We kind of take that for granted. But really, farmers, and particularly as you mentioned, women in farming, they're having it really, really tough. And my prayer is that God will take good care of them, because they are taking good care of us as well. And if there's anything we can do practically as well, let us know here. If you are a farmer or a woman in farming, let us know here. Tell us, if you identify with some of these hardships that Rod is talking about here. 0491 and 064669. We want to pray for you. We want to be able to support you in however we can. Rod, we have about 2 minutes left. I think I'm going to get producer Shells to give us a little bit more time here, because you also wanted to talk, and I think this is more important than ever. And a lot of people are considering, hey, how can I move to the country and have a little bit more of a hold in my food security, my family's food security? So today you want to talk to us about soil and property access. So what are some of the things that people that are contemplating the move to the country that they should be wise about?
We've been going step by step through these different factors that people need to consider when they're assessing a property for purchase. You know, we've talked about climate and water and location and aspect and topography and size, and so these different things that you can't change about a property. And just an example of a problem that sometimes people come up again that's hot off the press that I thought I'd share about, and that is access to properties. You know, it's so important to check that a property you're considering to purchase has legal access. If the property runs right to the road, there's no problem with legal access. But if your property is set back and relying on some sort of an easement, it's really, really important that you check that is a legal easement, because some friends of ours were recently looking to buy a property close by to us. It suited their budget, it suited everything they were looking for. So they made an offer. Thankfully, that was conditional on due diligence being completed, and their conveyancer was very particular about following all the threads through, as a good solicitor or conveyancer will be. And she checked that the easement to this property, if the easement to this property was legal. And it turned out that the access was through what's called a travelling stock route, a TSR. And so these are areas along roads, main roads particularly, where, the farms don't come right up to the roads, but there's space there for farmers to drove their cattle, to walk their cattle from farm to farm or to town. And when she followed this TSR through, Local Land Service, which is the government agency that looks after TSRs, advised her that particular TSR was under a native title claim. And so some years in the past, over a decade ago, local Indigenous folk had put a title claim over all the TSRs in the area because they are government property. And so the solicitor followed it through to the local Aboriginal Land Service, or land organisation, had put this title claim over, and they advised her that from their perspective, that this property was actually landlocked, because they would not be willing to honour the time, the age-old agreement that local landholders could use the TSR as access. And so that threw their whole property purchase a spanner in the works, and to the point where they withdrew their offer because they don't have a legal access.
Wow. So does it mean that they could prevent them from accessing their property or getting in and out? Is that basically what it's at stake?
Yes. If this land claim is finally solved in their favour, it's been ongoing for decades and it hasn't been resolved yet. But absolutely, if the land claim is granted, they could either prevent their access or they could charge them for the privilege of using their access.
Wow. Okay. Well, there's so many. Like, who in the world would even think about that when they're trying to? They look at the property in the country. It ticks all the boxes. And then there's like TSRs and, legal battles, and everything can really put the whole process down the drain.
Well, I hope every listener now will ask that question when they're ever looking to purchase a country property. Is my access legal? It's just another one of those traps that we can fall into if we're doing it for the first time, or we're inexperienced, or we don't get the right advice.
Wow.
My friend and his wife are just so thankful that the conveyancer was diligent and followed it through to 100% make sure that their client was being looked after.
Shout out that conveyancer was really doing their job properly there, because that would be very hard to catch.
I wish I could advertise her services here, because she deserves, kudos and more business because of that. That's the
absolutely
sort of conveyancer you want to be looking after your property purchase.
Look, if you need a conveyancer that is as diligent as this lady, text us here, and we'll forward your inquiry to Rod, and he'll connect you with them, because we definitely have two privileged people that are doing their jobs really well. Rod, thank you so much for today. Thanks for raising it up, particularly how tough our farmers are doing, so we can spare some thoughts and some prayers, especially for them, and even some practical help there. We definitely think that all Australians owe a debt of gratitude to our farmers here, because they are the ones allowing everything else to really continue. When our bodies are nourished, when you have food on our table, it's because there's a lot of hard work between every single salad leaf or tomato or cucumber or piece of meat that goes into our plate. Thank you very much, Rod. I appreciate your time with us, and we're looking forward to talk to you again next time, when we will continue our journey through moving to the country.